Hey guys, Sarak here, and today I'm going to talk about some of the more confusing rulings found with the new Fire King cards from the recently released structure deck. So, let's start with these four cards. We've got Barong, Rangbali, Ponix, and Sacred Garunix. So, all of these four have a similar effect where if a monster is destroyed, they can summon themselves from the hand. So, first thing to note is they actually have different requirements for this. So, Garunix and Ponix state that if a monster that was originally fire is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card. Okay? From the hand or graveyard in Garunix's case, just from the hand in Ponix's case. Okay? Rangbali and Barong, so the Beast Warriors rather than the Winged Beasts, state if a face-up Fire King monster is destroyed by card effect. So they actually have slightly different activation requirements, just to be aware of. So not everything will meet these the activation requirement for Barong or Rangbali, but pretty much everything will meet the activation requirement for Ponix and Phoenix. Monster has to be on the field, monster can be anywhere. Has to be a Fire King, just has to be a fire monster. Doesn't work with battle, does work with battle. Okay? The second thing to point out, and this is probably the most obtuse ruling in the deck, if you have all four of these in your hand, you destroy a face-up Fire King monster on your field, not by battle, by card effect. So you meet all four triggers. How many of these can you summon? You can summon one. You choose one to summon. Hey, this is a really obtuse ruling. I will link to the ruling page where it explains the ruling. This ruling has been around for a long time. Okay? It was put in place because of a card called Green Baboon, Defender of the Forest. If you meet a trigger to special summon a card from the hand, and you have multiple cards that you could special summon from meeting that trigger, you choose one. This also applies if Garunix is in the graveyard. If Garunix is in the graveyard and you have all three in your hand and you meet all four triggers or requirements to special summon, you still choose one. Okay? You still can only choose one. Rant over. You can still only choose one. Okay? This is the most obtuse ruling to get your head around. So, for the next bit, let's talk about Barong and Ponix, because their second effects are quite similar. So, they have a second effect that happens in the standby phase following their destruction. So, let's read their effects. So, if this card, during the next standby phase after this card was destroyed and sent to the graveyard. During the next standby phase after this card was destroyed and sent to the graveyard. Okay. These effects activate in that following standby phase. Okay. They can be interacted with then. You may have seen cards like Mirror Jade or DPE. Those cards activate when they go to the graveyard or when they leave the field. Okay? They cannot be interacted with following that. Okay? And then they just happen at the point of whenever it says on the card. So the end phase for Mirror Jade, the next standby phase for DPE. These activate, these start a chain in the standby phase. Okay? This also means that these can be interacted with between that. Their effects haven't gone off. If you remove a copy from the graveyard, okay, it will now not activate in the standby phase. If you special summon a copy back and then link off with it, it has no longer been destroyed and stayed in the graveyard until its trigger can be met. So, what this means is, if you have multiple copies of Ponix, make sure you specify, if you're bringing one back or special summoning one, specify that it's not a copy that has been destroyed. Okay? Because you need to keep track of the copies of Ponix or copies of cards that have been destroyed versus copies of cards that haven't, that have those delayed triggers on. So if you have two copies of Ponix, one you used for a link summon and one was destroyed by Fire King Island, and then you need to special summon one of them back from the graveyard through a High Kieran or an Arvata effect, make sure you specify you're bringing back the one that wasn't destroyed. Although with Arvata, then if you're going to link someone with them, although Arvata, if you leave it on the field, it will be destroyed again in the end phase. So it's got the last thing that happened to it on the field must have been its destruction. They cannot have left or moved out of the graveyard since then. And if you're playing multiple copies, make sure you specify which copy you're interacting with if you're moving them out in and out of the graveyard. Okay, to make sure you always leave the copy that was destroyed in the graveyard. Be really, really careful if you're playing on simulators. So if it's something like Dueling Book or you're playing in person, then just say, I'm interacting with a copy that wasn't destroyed and leaving the destroyed one in the graveyard. If you're playing on an automated simulator, be really careful with which copy you're moving in and out of the graveyard, because if you accidentally remove the copy that was destroyed, and it won't tell you which copy was the destroyed copy, you just need to know your graveyard order, then you will not get that trigger in the standby phase. The next thing to look at is the two negators, so Rangbali and Arvata. So these have very similar effects. Arvata does monsters and Rangbali does spells and traps. So the first thing to state is neither of them destroy the card that they negate as part of their effect. Okay, they destroy a fire monster. Okay, in your hand or face up field. Okay, so firstly, they destroy a fire monster. You can destroy an Ash Blossom. Okay, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a Fire King. Normally you want it to be a Fire King because that's what your deck benefits off, but you can destroy an Ash Blossom. Secondly, yes, so neither of the effects say destroy. So a monster will stay on the field with its effect negated. Okay, Rangbali, if it's a normal spell and trap, it has no difference. Okay, if it's a continuous or a field spell or a continuous trap, and you negate it at the point of activation, it will go to the graveyard. If it's a field spell effect, or a continuous spell effect, or a continuous trap effect, that they are choosing to activate at a later point, okay, after the card has already been activated and placed on the field and stays on the field, that card will just stay on the field. Okay, that is the ruling. Secondly, Arvata's second effect, okay, to special summon a Fire, Wing Beast, Beast, or Beast Warrior. Remember, it negates the effect, okay? So you can't use its effect if you special summon it. Just remember that it does in fact negate the effect and destroy the monster in the end phase. Next, let's talk about Fire King High Avatar Kirin. So Kirin, the main thing to stay with this card is none of the effects target, okay? The quick effect from hand does not target, okay? If your fire monster gets removed from the field, choose another one if you've still got a suitable monster that meets the requirements. Okay? It does not target. Neither does the graveyard effect, where you can special summon it and destroy a card on the field. Reminder, the first one is your cards, the second one is any card. The second one is also optional. If there are no cards you want to destroy, you don't have to. But neither of them target. You do not have to designate a target on activation. Let's talk about Fire King Sanctuary. So the main thing with Fire King Sanctuary, when this card is activated, you can place a Fire King Island from your deck face up in your field zone. Fire King Island. This is placing. This is not written on Ash Blossom. It is not adding a card from deck to hand. It is not sending a card from deck to the graveyard. It is not special summoning from the deck. Okay? Fire King Sanctuary cannot be hit with Ash Blossom. Similarly, they cannot change Roland Lockbird to Fire King Sanctuary because it does not add a card from the main deck to the hand. So they cannot interact with it in that way. You can interact with Fire King Island, and it often is the best place to interact with, but you can't interact with Fire King Sanctuary in that way. The main other thing to point out is the Xyz Summon effect must use Fire King monsters and must summon a Fire Xyz monster. Okay? Must use Fire Kings as material, must summon a Fire Xyz monster. Fire King Island. So, remember, Fire King Island has an effect where if it goes to the graveyard or is banished, destroy all monsters you control. Okay? This is mainly for people playing against Fire Kings. They cannot protect this card if you Cosmic Cyclone it. So, just be aware of that fact. They cannot protect this card if they Cosmic Cyclone it. During your main phase, destroy one monster in your hand or face up on the field, and add one Fire King monster from your deck to your hand. There is no cost to this effect, okay? It just destroys if the effect resolves, okay? It destroys as part of resolution. There is no cost, there is no targeting. If they Ash Blossom with this, you do not destroy. Secondly, the card you'll most likely be adding is Sacred Fire King Garunix. If you add Garunix, you can immediately special summon it. It has met its activation condition. Okay, to special summon. A fire monster has been destroyed by a card effect. Okay? Even if you didn't have this a copy of Garunix in your hand when you declared the activation of Fire King Island. This is because the hand is a private knowledge zone. Okay? Your opponent does not know if you actually had a copy of Garunix in your hand before or not at all. Okay? You could, if you're playing multiple copies of Garunix, you could have easily drawn one. They cannot verify that you did not have a copy in your hand. So you can activate the effect. Okay? And it actually specifies on the card where it says you can special summon this card from your hand if it was there, from the graveyard if it was there when the monster was destroyed, or your hand even if not. So, this is very similar to the ruling with Salamangreat Gazelle, where if you discard a Cyberse monster with Cynet Mining, and then search Gazelle, you can immediately summon the Gazelle. That was a little bit more obtuse because Gazelle was actually limited for a very long time, so your opponent did actually know you didn't have the Gazelle in your hand if you were searching it, but the ruling still works the same way. Okay? Finally, don't forget, Fire King Island does in fact have a second effect. If you control no monsters, special summon one winged beast monster from your hand. This can summon Garunix, it can summon Ponix. Okay, but just remember, it does have that effect, but the effect does only interact with winged beast monsters. Right, that is a good number of the more obtuse rulings for the Fire King deck. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope the rulings now actually make a little bit more sense, and you won't get people telling you off for trying to summon 4 Fire King monsters from your hand at once, because unfortunately it doesn't work that way. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you again soon.